want to kind of start where you finished off about the urgency that we're facing. And I just want to check in with you, because this conversation that we're having today is happening in the context of a climate emergency.
Right.
And I think there is a view that perhaps says, in this context, maybe justice can wait. Like maybe the most important thing now is just get the technology done, get the technology in, get this transition happening, and we can address justice later. So my question for you is, why not wait?
Yeah. Well, so obviously there's a moral argument. We'll put that one aside. I mean, there is a strong moral argument that this is a moment where we can actually right a lot of wrongs through a new economy. I mean, the energy transition is about creating a new economic system. But we'll put the moral argument aside. I think in terms of the practical, for those who believe in the climate crisis, we can't move at speed and scale unless communities are with us. They will protest, and they should, if they don't see themselves in this transition. We're talking about, again, speed and scale and transformation of our economy, transformation of our landscape. Communities are going to want to know what's going on, and they're also going to want to know how they benefit from it. Make it make sense to me. We had those same debates in the United States as well, with communities that were sort of like, I don't understand what you're talking about. Make it make sense, and make it brass tacks, right? Job creation, business creation, the economic development aspects of this, the lower cost of energy. So, and if it didn't make sense to them, they wanted no part, or the other side is they would protest.
And I think people in this room would understand that anger that comes if you don't include community from the beginning. Do you think that was a key part of your program, that you got the community involved early? You had a structural system that facilitated, that built that community engagement into any program that was happening?
Yeah, I mean, again, I sort of didn't have a lot of time to study up when I got into the building, so I took everything I knew about energy justice into that role, and the core of energy justice is really about that engagement piece. I will also say that President Biden was elected through a multi-class, multiracial, multi-age coalition that was a very fragile coalition that came together to elect him. But the promise was we were going to have a just transition. I mean, that was... He ran on that. And so even if, I didn't have that knowledge and understanding of energy justice when I came in, the expectation was always going to be that communities had to have a seat at the table. They were expecting it. They had elected the president on that promise. And so we needed to make it work for them as well. But it is sort of just a natural part of thinking about sound project design, thinking about sound policy design and program design as well.
You touched on this a little bit in your speech when you talked about the kind of surprise that businesses that were perhaps used to developing technologies were suddenly asked to develop these community benefit proposals. Can you tell us a little bit about how industry met that moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because when I was in the role, I had a lot of opportunities to meet with industry. I had a lot of opportunities to have behind the closed doors meetings, private meetings, and often the folks in that meeting would say, "Thank you, like this is helping," because sometimes they were having to make the arguments from within to say, "I think we need to do this differently in order to reduce project risk," but because we provided the top cover from the policy level, they could then say, "Well, if we want to get these billions, we've got to do this. We've got to change the way we do business." And so the uptake was great. What I know now is that there are still corporations, project developers that are actually still doing development in this way, understanding that it is good business, understanding that it accelerates project development, and it reduces project risk. So there were definitely those who were waiting for the moment, and those who are now, trying to make sure they're still implementing projects with communities in mind and able to explain what the benefits of those projects will be.
So I know you came into a system that had already been effectively made law through President Biden's Project 40. I guess I'm interested here when we're kind of got a different starting place, right? So we're kind of a step back and asking, how did we build justice to the frameworks that we're engaging with? And I'm wondering if you can share with us any lessons from your experiences, how to bring people on that journey.
Yeah. I mean, it literally is about bringing people on the journey. I talked about going to my dad's hometown, with a delegation of 60 senior Department of Energy officials. I mean, that had never been done. We organized tours, for lack of a better term, into communities that were some of the most distressed communities in the United States. We created a practice where we were often in communities talking to folks about issues they confronted. That had never been done before at the Department of Energy. And why it was important was because, again, it gave life to the data. We also created space for folks to curse us out sometimes, in a virtual meeting, or come to DC and share all their grievances and get that out, so then we could talk about solutions. So I think there are two things. We went to communities in a way that was unprecedented, and for my colleagues, who were engineers and technical people and wonks, like they didn't understand how the programs they were designing really made an impact at the household level. So they needed to see that. And then we did something unprecedented, which was blasting open the doors of the Department of Energy in a way that had never been done for businesses, for community members, and in some ways also supporting financially folks to be able to travel to DC to meet with policy leaders.
Amazing. I'm going to go to the Slido questions in a moment, but I just want to ask you one last question before I do that. So you ended your presentation with a few, I think, really important calls to action, and one of them was to keep going. And I know a lot of people in this room have been, fighting hard for a long time, and there's still a long way to go. So I just wondered if you could share with us, your experience as someone who's maintained the rage for a long time. How do you keep going? And in the face of, the urgency and also, I think, the kind of overwhelming side of this task, how do you look after yourself and keep going?
Yeah. Well, it's a pretty dark time, as I led with, and there are a couple things. One is joy, finding joy. So, there can be moments where you're just in this complaining mode and, everything is terrible. But we get to live on this planet. We still have it. And so I try to get out as much as I can. I try to listen to music. I try to, enjoy humanity, but also enjoy the earth while I can. And so we have to find the joy. I think Brendan said something that I thought was really powerful, and that is, sure, we're going to go through some stuff. It might take 10 years to get out of this, but I want to create the future. So I'm thinking about end state. I'm thinking about the world I want. And that has allowed me to be productive, allowed me to be joyful, allowed me to bring together the people who are thinking about futures. I'm not a sort of Afrofuturist, but I'm really interested in futures thinking and futures scenario planning. And that's giving me hope. Because to be honest, all the slides I presented, that was about the system we had. It was not working. It doesn't work. They're burning it down right now. So I'm ready to pick up sticks and whatever to build the new system, one that does work. And so that's what actually gives me hope.
Thank you. I've got a question here about the weatherization piece of policy that you referred to in your research, and just asking if you could give us a little bit more information about how this work distinguished between different housing types. For example, owner-occupiers versus renters.
Yeah, I mean, so
getting very technical.
It is very technical. So first of all, we don't have enough weatherization money, period. Our normal appropriations for weatherization at the Department of Energy is around $3.5 billion. We got $3.5 billion more through the Inflation Reduction Act, actually through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So $7 billion, but it's still not enough. And so the question was about renters versus homeowners. There are lots of ways. I mean, owners tend to be able to access this better. We know or access weatherization services in a more easily. I mean, obviously, there's not the split incentive issue you have when you're a renter and your landlord doesn't want to, do the weatherization. So there are some challenges for renters accessing these types of funds. We weren't able to sort of rewire all of those things, but one of the things we were working on was expanding the sort of categories of things that could count as weatherization assistance. Because, again, much of our housing stock is just not up to par, and lots of parts of a home need to be weatherized in order to make it energy efficient, but our regulatory framework excluded certain types of weatherization activities. Also, I talked to advocates on the ground, and they're like, well, what's the point of putting solar on a house when it's completely energy inefficient? So we were also sort of thinking about the sequencing of different home interventions as well as we were doing our work.
Okay, I'm going to sneak in 2 more quick questions.
I'll be quick.
What's the one thing you'd recommend we do as a starting point here in Australia? And also, what's the other side of this look like if we don't get justice into the transition? What does a transition without equity look like?
Sure. So, I mean, one thing is to keep having these conversations, right? And to actually, again, come to shared understandings and shared values around where you want to go and what the vision is. And then when you get off track, you can kind of come back to the vision. Okay, we're heading here. And also, there are many different ways to get to a vision. So also creating space for multiple policy pathways, multiple pathways to get to your end goal, but aligning. I also think creating space for multiple voices in the debate. Folks that come from distressed and disadvantaged communities, bringing them in as not as sort of let's listen and let's study you, but let's actually employ you to be a part of our policy team. So we need that. I mean, that's what DEI is really about as well. But then your question was, what happens if we don't do this? I mean, that's a pretty, to me, a dark assessment of the world. I mean, I think there is a world in which we create more inequality in the transition. We create more environmental harms in the transition. We exclude folks. And that will lead to all sorts of other social harms. Again, social unrest and that sort of thing. We're looking at a total transformation of our economy, a total transformation of our system. We're sort of the frogs in the pot right now, so we're not seeing it's incremental to us. But in about 20 years, everything is going to be different. And at least in the United States, I mean, we have these investment tools. I don't think they're going to get completely pulled back. So that means lots of industrial development in places. Communities have to come with us.
Amazing. And I'm guessing that's part of what keeps you going, even with this hostility that you're seeing in the world. Yeah. We are out of time. There are a lot more questions. Come and approach Shalanda and ask her directly. And she's a great source of wealth on this. Shalanda, thank you for the insights. Thank you for helping us, explore why it's so important to understand structural inequality within the energy system and, making us focus back on the human experience at the end of the chain. So could you all please join me in thanking Shalanda?